Hello and welcome to Checking the Vitals, a podcast powered by SpecialtyCare. Hello and welcome to Scrubbing In, a podcast powered by SpecialtyCare. I'm Todd Schlosser, and today my guest is Dr. Brian Lima, the Director of Cardiac Transplantation at Norwell Health. In our conversation, Dr. Lima and I discuss what led him to a career in healthcare, specifically heart transplantation surgery, and how future plans include him authoring his own book. I think you'll find the part of the conversation about engaging a heart failure specialist early on in the heart disease process very eye-opening. I know I did. But for now, enjoy Checking the Vitals with Dr. Brian Lima. So I'd like to start off the podcast by asking everyone sort of what drove them into pursuing a career in medicine. So what was it sort of in your youth or young adult life that made you want to be a heart transplant surgeon?
So wanting to be a heart transplant surgeon or a heart surgeon specifically evolved over time. But when I realized I wanted to go into medicine was at a very early age when my father had a heart attack. He was only in his early 50s, and I was very young. I was like 10 years old. And so thankfully he did okay, but that scared our family a lot. So that's when I sort of began to have this fascination with, interest in wanting to learn medicine, become a doctor, so to help other people, other families not feel helpless like that, like we felt when that all occurred.
So I'd imagine at 10, you would feel very helpless because you're sort of in a whole new world. You probably hadn't been to a hospital a lot, and it's like a whole new thing, and then it's sort of a life and death situation. And fortunately, he came through it well, it sounds like, but that could be an eye-opener for anybody. So at that point, you decided medicine's the life for me. Now, but that wasn't what got you into heart transplant surgery? That seems interesting to me.
So it came later, like why I wanted to become a surgeon. So it sort of evolved piecemeal, I guess. And I did a summer program at NYU in college at the medical center. And I randomly I forget what I filled out in my little questionnaire. I was randomly connected to shadow a surgeon at NYU that summer. And he's a cancer surgeon, actually, surgical oncologist. And so I had thought of surgery, but I just knew medicine, but I really didn't know, I didn't know anything. I mean, I was young. And so.
I mean, that's why they do those things. So you can get an idea of what you want.
So here I was 20 years old, and he let me scrub into a procedure. I actually got to watch a surgery. And I don't know what it was about that, but it was like an epiphany. It was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is amazing. And I was hook, line, and sinker, I was done. And then from there, it was, okay, I'm going to be a surgeon. And then it evolved into heart surgery, heart transplant. As I kind of got to learn more and see more, heart surgery for me was just the ultimate fascination, the ultimate rush. It's just amazing to see you have a heart stop. Even if you're just doing a routine heart operation, you have the heart stop for 2 hours. Yeah. And then you bring it back to life at the end. And it never gets old. Yeah. So that's kind of how it evolved.
So there's some things in there I want to talk about in a second. But so I think you went to Cornell for
undergrad,
and then you went to Duke for medicine, correct?
Yeah.
So you sort of focused on that, I guess, surgical on that track at Duke, I should say, right?
Yeah, so Duke is, I think how my career trajectory evolved did have a lot to do with kind of what I saw when I was exposed to at Duke, because Duke is has such a legacy for excellence in surgery, namely heart surgery too, with Dr. Sabiston having been there as the chairman for such a long time. The father of bypass surgery. Yeah. So the culture of heart surgeries is very, very strong at Duke, and so I think that also played a huge role in my exposure to it early on as a medical student throughout my time.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, not speaking for you, but your first scrubbing in surgery was actually a cancer surgery. It wasn't a heart surgery.
That's right.
So you must have had maybe a mentor or just enough experiences in the heart surgery space that you were like, that is for me.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
So you graduated from Duke. You went to, where did you do your residency?
So I stayed at Duke. Yeah, so I stayed at Duke for 7 years to do general surgery residency. Okay. And it's typically 5 years, but Duke and many other programs like to involve research.
Yeah, they have a research component.
And so 2 years of research, years 3 and 4. And so that's where I also kind of did a deep dive in heart surgery. Because I did heart surgery research, cardiovascular biology.
Right.
And incidentally, it was going to potentially be with Dr. Oz. This was when
Oh,
Dr.
really?
Oz,
Before TV.
Before TV,
Right.
yeah. So he obviously was a very well-known
Sure.
pioneer in heart transplant surgery and mechanical heart pumps. And so he had a very, very prolific lab at Columbia. And actually, one of the Duke surgery residents had gone there a year or two before I was considering to spend his 2 years of research there. So I was emailing back and forth and was actually, for a minute there, very close to doing my lab work at Columbia.
But then you stayed at Duke.
I stayed at Duke and finished out and was going to also stay there to do my heart surgery training. By then, I had already been at Duke for 11 years.
Yeah.
And they had 3 slots for the heart surgery fellowship. There were 3 of us in our finishing program. They're like, hey,
Might as well.
And I just said, well, let me just take a look around. I love Duke. I bleed Duke
Sure.
blue.
I mean, you have a Duke lamp.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, I can't say enough about Duke. But I was like, well, let me just see kind of what's out there.
Sure.
And I visited the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
And that's, at the time, and still arguably, the mecca of heart surgery, right?
Yeah. I mean, you talked about Duke being sort of a training ground for heart surgeons.
Yeah.
The Cleveland Clinic is sort of that for actual fellowship and
It's
residency.
something I would describe from a trainee's perspective.
Yeah.
What I likened it to is like a kid in a candy store. You go in and literally on any given day, there's 20 open heart operations being performed by the who's who in the world in the specific niche areas of heart surgery.
Sure.
And it's sort of being able to be exposed to that. It's like drinking out of a fire hose. It's literally, the next closest place in the United States does maybe half that amount of surgery in a year.
Yeah.
And so it is just a beast.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, it's all about reps.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Exposure.
Yeah, absolutely.
If, why not try to, so and I thought, going somewhere else, seeing a different perspective.
Sure.
For those reasons, I elected to go there.
Yeah. So at the time, we talked about this a little bit before, Toby Cosgrove was heading the Cleveland Clinic. And I've been fortunate enough to hear him talk. And one of the things I took away was when he transitioned from being a heart surgeon to the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, he was totally unprepared for that change. Was it a very different change when you went from Duke to the Cleveland Clinic?
It was. I mean, there was definitely some risk to it because at Duke I was a known commodity.
Sure.
I had been there for a long, long, long time.
Yeah.
All the heart surgeons knew me. There is no question that I would get early, frequent repetitions.
Right.
They knew, okay, here, why don't you help do this case, and
Right.
we'll walk you through it. I had to prove myself all over again,
Yeah.
which is actually, on the one hand, you could say maybe most would be averse to that, but I actually thought that would help just push me even more.
Absolutely.
And so I had to sort of prove myself completely. And the learning curve for heart surgery is pretty steep.
I'd imagine.
Even after training for 7 years in general surgery, now you're going to something that's a moving target. And the needle angles and everything are completely different. And it's literally a surgery where at all, let's say 100 steps, you can literally kill somebody.
Yeah.
Every mistake, every step along the way could lead to death.
It is the very definition of high risk, high reward.
Yeah. And so basically when you have one of the most famous heart surgeons in the world hand you the scalpel or hand you the stitch and say, all right, so see what you got, It's exciting.
Yeah, sure.
Nerve-wracking, but
I can see that as being very intimidating, though.
Very intimidating.
Yeah.
And you kind of had to make the most of it because, that was your shot. That was like your audition.
Yeah.
And if you blew it, you kind of blew it.
Absolutely.
There's 20 other guys warming up in the batting cage.
Who wish they got your spot.
Who stepped right in.
Yeah.
So it felt like being in the NFL combine or something like that, or preseason.
I can definitely see
it's
that.
Like, hey, you kind of threw an interception that last series. Why don't you sit this one out?
Yeah.
Well, that's what it felt like.
Yeah. So obviously you were a success there, though, because you went through that program, and then you had some various other positions, but eventually ended up here,
Right.
Where you sort of are the surgical director of heart transplantation.
Right.
So I mean, that's not something you get overnight. Obviously, there was a lot of schooling that went into that, but like, how did that all come about, and why did you choose Long Island to set up a surgical transplantation center?
I'm from the Northeast originally. I was born and raised in New Jersey,
Okay.
and had for the last almost 20 plus years been out of the Northeast and got pretty comfortable. I was in Texas at Baylor. I was at the helm of the mechanical circulatory support program there. We were one of the busiest heart transplant centers in the world. And I had to manage to make a bit of a name for myself in the field, having published a lot in that space. And so that's why I was in contention for this type of position.
Right.
And what struck me was it caught me off guard. I did not have any clue that Long Island still, after all this time, didn't have a heart transplant program. And if you look at the numbers, you're talking about, if you add Long Island, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, it's about 8 million people.
Yeah, that's a huge population.
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find anything even remotely close to that in the entire country where that size of a population doesn't have a heart transplant center to call their own.
Yeah.
And, heart transplant is not, getting your gallbladder taken out. There's a lot that goes into figuring out who's an appropriate candidate, back and forth visits, and then not to mention the follow-up afterwards. So this population of folks have had to endure that hardship of having to trek all the way into Manhattan, which from a mileage perspective isn't a big deal, but anyone who's traveled here knows that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
It's very costly, the tolls, the traffic, it's very taxing for families. So I think that in and of itself has presented a huge barrier to care. So I thought it was one of those things that I like to call it the second epiphany. And the first epiphany was surgery.
Yeah.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah.
The second one was, wow, this is, I felt like morally compelled.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be the opportunity of a lifetime to help start something for such a massive population of people.
Yeah. So when opening up a surgical center, especially one so vital as heart surgery, in a population size of that magnitude, was there a sort of influx of need that came in after you guys opened your doors, or how did that reception in the community go?
Well, it's still a work in progress in that we're still trying to spread the word, if you will, about the availability of these services. I think it's decades old now, these referral patterns, we kind of have to make do without having heart transplant on Long Island.
Yeah.
So I think we're still, doing our best to promote the program, increase awareness for the program. So there's definitely a massive need, and I see and hear from patients on a day-to-day basis that really will benefit from the availability of these services. But it's a massive unmet need that hopefully we'll be able to fill over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't think about that, because it's not like a walk-in clinic where you open your doors and people are like, oh, hey, I can go there and get, my medicine for whatever.
Right.
You had to be referred to probably by a few people to end up, here. So you actually need to change the sort of referral culture, if you will, in this whole area.
Yeah, and that also brings me to a soapbox I love to get on, and it's hard for me to get off of, and it's heart failure itself. It does not get the street cred that diseases like cancer get. It's still very, very much case by case. It's not standardized like cancer. Cancer, it's very sort of cookie cutter, slam dunk. You have a cancer, well, then you go straight to an oncologist.
Yeah.
No questions asked, and we figure out if you need chemo, radiation, surgery, et cetera. Heart failure, it's, well, let's see how things go. And unfortunately, like cancer, it could get worse over time, silently.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, more often than I care to admit, we see heart failure too late, where patients are, beyond the scope of what can be treated with medications, and that doesn't always go to by schedule. I mean, it'll happen abruptly, and someone all of a sudden is deathly ill. Yeah. And then we're trying to pick up the pieces and make up for lost time. So there's a lot of room for improvement in heart failure care in general throughout the country, because really only a small fraction of the people that really would stand to benefit from heart transplant or mechanical heart pumps are actually ever referred soon enough to reap those benefits.
So you guys are sort of at a traumatic event center, and not so much on the prevention side, even though there is a strong case to be made that you should be involved in the prevention side. Is that typically because, I mean, if you have cancer, you have it, right? And if you have sort of precursors for heart disease, there are things you can do to mitigate that. You know, exercise, eat better, those sort of things. So is it that those sort of preventative things get prescribed earlier on in the process, and then perhaps the patient they're not quite as engaged in that medical decision as the doctor was.
Right.
So then they end up in a traumatic event and end up at a place like this. Is that sort of the reason that you're not engaged earlier on?
Well, I think it's because I would say that more and more heart failure should be thought of as something like cancer.
Yeah.
Like cancer, if you aggressively treat it up front, even at an earlier stage, your chance of a cure is greater.
Yeah.
Heart failure, if you wait till someone's really, really sick, your likelihood that A, they're going to get better, or B, they would even tolerate a surgery to get them there is less. And there's many patients who simply get to us too late where they're just not eligible for anything. There's also the fact that there's a lot that goes into being able to figure out if someone is a candidate for a transplant or a heart pump. There's a whole laundry list of check boxes we have to go through. I tell patients we got to look under the hood, A to Z, and make sure everything is
right.
Are there any hidden cancers? Have you had your cancer screenings? Things like that. Things that could preclude candidacy for a transplant.
Yeah.
And again, you'd be surprised how many patients come to us. They finally get to us. They're really sick, and oh, by the way, they've not had any of those things. So now here we are, 11th hour, trying to save their life. They need something now, and now we're trying to make up for lost time and get this screening, that screening, check off all those necessary boxes so that we can make the right decision. So I think if they were referred early to a heart failure specialist, we may say, okay, well, you're not sick enough at this time but we noticed that you haven't had this screening, that screening. Let's get all of our ducks in a row so that if and when things were to, get worse, we already know about you. You're in our system. This is not coming as a surprise to you and your family. You see, that's another thing. They're like, transplant? What? Like, what are you talking about? No one told us this.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, they should have.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
You should have been made aware that this was a potential eventuality because of your disease. One, of course, that we would like to avoid, but one that we need to act on in due time, or the window of opportunity closes. So that's kind of where things are with heart failure.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a question about that. So, and I understand getting all your ducks in a row and preparing for the worst, even if you don't need it. That makes complete sense to me because it is so difficult to get, on the transplant list and get an actual transplant heart. And that process can take a long, long time, and some patients don't make it to their surgery, to their transplant day, because they were engaged in the process too late for them to I guess, make it that far. That's still a problem, right? I mean,
it is, and also though, the silver lining, I guess you could say, is that there's mechanical substitutes, very, very good mechanical substitutes for the heart. It's my favorite organ, but at the end of the day, it is just a pump, I hate to say. And it's a glorified pump. So very amenable to sort of an artificial sort of substitute that have come a long, long way. So we do have something literally on the shelf that we can offer somebody if they're too sick to wait for a transplant, if for whatever reason they're not a candidate for a transplant.
Are those long-term solutions?
They can be. So the latest pumps have durability that rivals, outcomes that rival transplant.
Oh, wow.
So I think it's definitely something that, again, has not really gotten out there to the masses, to the referring providers, and we're working on that. But there is a lot that we could do to save somebody, even if it doesn't mean necessarily a transplant for whatever reason.
Very interesting. So does those mechanical, devices must work exactly like the heart, or maybe more like a perfusion device where they just keep it pumping? Like, does it actually beat?
So the mainstay is a left ventricular assist device, an LVAD, which is basically a pump attached to the heart. So you're not actually removing the heart and replacing it. You're attaching this pump that, by virtue of the two places you attach it, take over the work of that ventricle, that main pumping chamber of the heart. So they just basically say, you know what, we're going to take over the work, and we redirect the blood flow through this pump as opposed to through the heart.
Okay.
And it's a pretty simple, I mean, it's an open heart surgery, but
you say pretty simple for you, but there's no way I could do it.
But it's a relatively straightforward heart operation. When done at the right time, it can go very, very well.
Yeah.
But it's really the timing. Not doing it too late and someone too sick.
Yeah. Much like everything in life is sort of down to timing. So about that, so when you're in there doing the surgery, and as you said, it's a very critical moment in that patient's life. And it's a very high risk, high reward. And obviously you're sort of the head of the team that's there, but there are a lot of people in the room helping with that. You know, you have your anesthesiologist, you have your perfusionist, you have probably other people scrubbing in to make sure things go, like a surgical assist, that kind of stuff. How important is that teamwork there?
Heart surgery is the ultimate team sport.
Yeah.
And it's critical that, you obviously control the conduct of the surgery, but you're also sort of orchestrating the movement and function of these other participants that will all play a key role. And heart transplant also, I have my colleague, Dr. Syed Hussein, who's the lead procuring surgeon also. So your surgeon that you work with that's actually looking at that donor heart, for example, while I'm working on the recipient, is huge. So those are your eyes out, several hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
So that level of trust has to be second to none. It's a dance. It's a delicate dance, and in heart transplant, especially, it has to be orchestrated down to the minute because time is of the essence. The heart can only be out of the body for a certain period of time before it can sustain some damage. So that all has to be very, very, very tightly sort of organized.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to transition a little bit to you recently are in, well, I should say in the late stages of writing a book. The
book is done. It's just in final editing, and hopefully should be in print in the next couple of months.
So the title of the book being Heart to Beat. And how did you, not so much the title, but we'll talk about that, but how did you decide that it was time to write a book and you were the person to write it?
It was really nothing I ever planned on, quite honestly. And nothing like this has ever happened in my life before, but I would say 5 years ago, 6 years ago, woke up in the middle of the night with this flurry of ideas. Like I just got my my phone and started writing a bunch of notes down. It's just something I felt compelled to do.
Sure.
Why me? I guess I asked the question, why not? I think we all have our own stories that I think are worth sharing. And my story is more of, I really was a long shot as far as if you consider where I came from. I'm a first generation Cuban American. My parents came over from Cuba. My dad was a factory worker. We didn't speak English at home. And I had a lot of, I guess the socioeconomic chips stacked against me in many ways.
Yeah.
Is it the most difficult or strenuous story of adversity ever? Of course not. But it's my story.
Yeah.
And I felt like the message that I could convey out there is that if you put set your mind to it, if you're willing to put in the work, sky's the limit. It's not an easy, road. There's definitely some dark days along the way, but I think it's more of a story of, hey, if I could do it, you could do it.
Sure.
If you can I tell residents, if you can tie your shoelaces, theoretically, you have what it takes to become a heart surgeon.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's about reps, like everything else. The 10,000 hour rule, all that stuff. It's being able to get back up after getting knocked down, handling disappointment, moving forward, and sticking to it is really what it's all about. And I think that's what this book is about. And I also close at the end of the book with sort of a note on heart health. That, like everything else in the book, nothing is passive. You have to be, active participant in your, self-improvement and being the best you can be. The same applies to your health. It's not autopilot. there's a lot of things you could do for your health, but it's not going to do it on its own. No one's going to exercise for you. No one's going to eat right for you. You have to do these things.
Right.
You have to take ownership over your health, and same applies with your life. You can be as successful as you want to be. It's about taking ownership and doing what it takes.
Yeah. So the book covers all of that. Things like how to, get back up when you've been knocked down. And do you share like certain experiences in your life where you did that?
Just for my own, for sake of simplicity, because I've never written an actual book before. I've written a lot of other like smaller journal, articles.
Right.
This was a whole new.
Well, you've written things that have been published in the medical space for sure. Yeah.
So to make it simple for me, I went chronological, and so I cover the various themes over the course of 12 chapters in sort of chronological order, and some of the early lessons, like first and foremost, you got to believe in yourself.
Sure.
You got to put in the work. All these different things, and then kind of how I kind of use personal vignettes to sort of illustrate these various points along the way.
Right.
But I go through the whole gamut, the good, the bad, the ugly, how, there is a price to pay for really going after something with, I make examples of elite athletes, Olympic athletes, people that have to put so much time and effort into that, your calling, that, it's tough to be well-rounded, or it's tough to have life balance when you're engaged in things that are so require so much effort.
Yeah.
And so it's not all rainbows and unicorns and stuff. There is some negative to it. And it's just knowing that, and that's often in and of itself a deterrent for some, or a limit to how far people are willing to go.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I think I've talked to a lot of people in your space, in surgery, or people who are, a perfusionist or an anesthesiologist. And some of the perfusionists said, I looked at medical school and doing the surgery route, and I realized that I didn't want to be in school for the next 15 years.
Yeah.
And perfusion's a great path, and I felt more comfortable doing that. So there's, a lot of people who that deters them from going on.
Right. And it's not that I think it's a book for everybody. It's definitely what I hope I can manage to convey or get across is that it's not a book about a heart surgeon, and this is only a book for people medically inclined or surgically inclined. This is a book for anybody. It's really a book about you could do anything you set your mind to.
Yeah, sort of about, it seems like about perseverance.
Yeah, perseverance, resilience. I do. I'm a kid who grew up in the 80s, so I do trash a little bit the social media and the
I'm sure rightfully so.
Insta-famous and instant gratification. A lot of things that I think now have impacted in a negative way some of these tried and true things, delayed gratification and stuff like that. Complacency is really coming to people just want something now, or so I touch on a lot of that stuff too.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty funny, actually.
Well, excellent.
I try to be humorous when I can, but we'll see. I don't know.
So I'd like to ask one final question, and that would simply be, if I came in and you told me that I needed a heart transplant or some sort of heart surgery, it would freak me out, for lack of a better term. So what is some information that you can give sort of the listener or the viewer here that would make them more optimistic about that whole process?
Sure. I mean, you wouldn't be human if you were not scared. It's a totally natural emotion or reaction to have. And I think the important thing is heart surgery is safe. We do it all the time. Our outcomes are fantastic, even in things as major as a heart transplant or a mechanical heart pump. A lot of it has to do with timing and not waiting till it's too late. And I tell patients this all the time. And that's kind of where I try to allay their fears. I say, us sitting here having this conversation with you conscious, not on a ventilator, in an ICU, is a good thing. That means we kind of are in control of the situation. We can sort of do this in a controlled fashion. It's not chaotic. It's not in the middle of the night when you're really sick and unstable. So by doing it in this controlled way, we're taking a surgery that, like all surgeries, there's a probably single-digit percentage risk of some complication.
I didn't realize it was that low.
It definitely is when it's controlled, elective, or not emergency.
Right.
Whenever it becomes an emergency, that's when you take something that has, some risk, small risk, and you make it much more risky.
Right.
So I think that in and of itself is something that I try to emphasize to patients. saying, look, yes, it's okay to be afraid. I'm going to walk you through it. But the good thing is we're going to do the right thing. It's going to be all right. We'll go step by step. We're not going to make this an emergency. We're not going to let it become an emergency. We're going to do this in a controlled way and have a great outcome.
If they're talking to someone and they're not being referred to a heart failure specialist, like you guys are here, how do they reach out and get a consultation or a conversation with a heart failure specialist as a patient?
Sure. I think the rest of medicine really hasn't caught up yet to this, but I think there will come a time when anybody with heart failure, no matter how not so severe, how mild, should be referred to a heart failure specialist. Just like anybody with any degree of cancer, no matter how preliminary it is, always sees a cancer doctor, no exceptions. And I think if someone has a diagnosis or have been told they have heart failure, they should definitely seek out a referral to a heart failure specialist.
So you can just ask for that.
You should, and most physicians readily oblige that. It happens all the time in various different things. Second opinion. Everyone's entitled to a second opinion too. I just think you can't go wrong. The worst that can happen is, hey, Mr. Smith, we appreciate, good news is your heart failure isn't severe enough to warrant anything, but we did notice X or Y, or we think we can maybe optimize this medication, that medication.
Sure, or let's start that checklist in case.
Yeah, there's a whole science to that's how you manage the medications, the newer medications that are out there for heart failure. It's not straightforward. And the specialty of heart failure cardiologists is relatively new. It's not been around for a long time. So it's an evolving field. So I think it's never too early, but it can definitely be too late.
Sure.
So I think it's better to err on the side of caution.
Absolutely.
Much rather see somebody too early. But at least now we know, about them. They know about us. They know about what some eventualities are with this kind of disease. So it doesn't come by surprise. And it may, just knowing your options is, knowledge is power. And this is no exception.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Dr. Lima, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
All right.
That's great.